Tonight at 10, we get it, says the Chancellor, as he performs one of the most spectacular policy U-turns of modern times. Under intense scrutiny, Kwasi Kwarteng abandons his policy of cutting income tax for the highest earners.
The Chancellor of the Exchequer.
After consistently defending the move, he was told by colleagues that the policy was wrong at a time of rising costs for millions.
I know the plan put forward only 10 days ago has caused a little turbulence. I get it. I get it. We are listening and have listened.
Just 24 hours earlier, the Prime Minister had been insisting that the policy would stay, despite the widespread criticism.
And tonight, another shift by the government, forced by events to make it. They're bringing forward their plan for dealing with debt to later this month to try to reassure the markets.
Yes, we'll have the latest from Birmingham on what the Chancellor admitted had been a tough day. Also tonight, raising the flag, Ukrainian forces retake a village in one of the regions annexed by Russia last week. A warning that the UK is facing a serious risk of gas shortages this winter, which could affect electricity supplies too. And a warm welcome in Fife as the King and the Queen Consort attend their first joint engagement since the end of formal mourning.
And coming up on the BBC News Channel, Leicester strike early as they look to move off the bottom of the table with victory against Nottingham Forest at the King Power.
Good evening. At the Conservative conference in Birmingham, party members have been taking in one of the most abrupt policy U-turns of modern times. The Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, who for days has been defending his decision to cut income tax for the highest earners, announced today that the policy would be abandoned. The Prime Minister, Liz Truss, had also been defending the policy over the weekend, but ministers were confronted with open rebellion among Conservative MPs and the very real prospect of defeat in the House of Commons. The proposal had been criticised as particularly unfair at a time of rising living costs for millions of households. It wasn't the only change today. The Chancellor's fiscal statement, along with forecasts from the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility, are now likely to be delivered this month and not much later at the end of November. Let's go live to Birmingham and our political editor, Chris Mason.
Huw, an extraordinary day here because conferences are meant to be a showcase. They are meant to be carefully choreographed. Today was not one of those carefully choreographed days. This evening, the announcement that you just mentioned, that they're going to rush forward a plan for dealing with the debt to try and smother the markets in reassurance, given how spooked they have been by the events of the last 10 days. And all of that after a colossal U-turn before most of us this morning had even had breakfast. First thing this morning, things are moving and fast. The planned tax cut for the highest paid is being junked. The government has blinked.
It was about an ambitious plan, and we talked to lots and lots of people up and down the country. I saw the reaction. We considered what to do with it. And I felt, and the Prime Minister felt, that this was just a distraction on what is a very strong package.
Translation, the idea tanked, so have Conservative poll ratings, and there was little chance MPs would vote for it anyway. So instead, it's being ditched as the Chancellor's next interview beckoned.
Do you owe an apology?
Actually having the humility to say, look, we got this wrong and we're not going to proceed with the abolition of the rate.
Do you owe people an apology?
We're not going to proceed with the abolition of the rate. We've listened to people. And yeah, there is humility and contrition in that.
Chancellor. Contrast what he called humility today with the pride of the original announcement just a week last Friday.
But I'm not going to cut the additional rate of tax today, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to abolish it altogether. From April the 23rd, we will have a single higher rate of income tax of 40%.
And contrast the Chancellor this morning with the Prime Minister yesterday.
Are you absolutely committed to abolishing the 45p tax rate for the wealthiest people in the country? Yes.
Little wonder after the U-turn, some ministers discovered the art of quick walking when in the company of cameras.
You're going to bump into walls, you're going to bump into a column.
Although others would talk.
Obviously, sometimes you have to face political reality and listen, and that's what they've done.
The overwhelming majority of what was announced, so the cut in national insurance, the cut in corporation tax, is going ahead, and that's fundamentally important to get to economic growth. This was the flotsam and jetsam of the announcement. Thank you very much.
And as for what Labour make of it...
Well, the mini-budget showed what their instincts were. Their instincts were to cut taxes for the wealthiest in society, paid for by borrowing, which in the end, current and future taxpayers will have to pay for.
The Prime Minister and Chancellor have binned one bit of their plans that proved impossible to sell. The thing is, there's quite a lot else in there that may not prove popular either. The prospect of spending cuts, real terms benefits cuts and spiralling interest rates, which critics will blame on them. And then there are those within the Conservative Party who are sceptical of the government, who will now ask, on what else might they budge?
The Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Enter, at less than a gallop, Kwasi Kwarteng for his hastily rewritten speech, greeted by applause that was polite rather than rapturous.
Thank you, conference. What a day. It has been tough, but we need to focus on the job in hand.
The Chancellor wearing the demeanour of a man winded by events, leaning on gallows humour.
I can be frank. I know the plan put forward only 10 days ago has caused a little turbulence. I get it. I get it. We are listening and have listened. And now I want to focus on delivering the major parts of our growth package.
There was, though, a defiance from Mr Kwarteng, a determination not to be derailed from his main mission.
We couldn't simply do nothing. We can't sit idly by. What Britain needs more than ever is economic growth, and a government wholly committed to economic growth. With grit, with drive and with determination, we can meet the challenges of this new era. Thank you.
Thumbs up from a colleague, smiles of relief. A slow walk after a long day, which will leave an indelible mark on this government. Chris Mason, BBC News in Birmingham.
As we heard, the highly controversial mini-budget of 10 days ago produced a little turbulence. Those were the Chancellor's words. That was Mr Kwarteng's reference to the collapsing pound and higher interest rates. Since the events of Friday the 23rd of September, the pound has regained now most of its losses. But the costs of government borrowing and mortgage interest rates are still higher. And there remains the big question of how the Chancellor will fund £43 billion worth of tax cuts. Our economics editor Faisal Islam has more details.
It was meant to be a growth plan, not a budget. It was meant to underpin the confidence of investors in all projects, from those involving towering cranes to ordinary house moves, to make that investment. But instead it amplified an interest rate shock from around the world and targeted it at the UK.
So if I look back at this, NatWest last week were quoting a 5-year fixed rate at 3.77, whereas the changes that were made today, their 5-year fixed rate cheapest is 5.14.
That's with a 40% deposit.
And that was with a 40% deposit, yeah.
10 minutes walk from the Chancellor's speech, a Birmingham mortgage broker is still seeing the shockwaves from last week hit ordinary consumers.
It's been a massive shock in this past week. The pace of change, very, very difficult to keep up with. Lenders withdrawing products with little or no notice, or even retrospectively telling us that a deal has gone.
The extent of the U-turn in financial terms is modest. The £45 billion of unfunded tax cuts becomes £43 billion. The now abandoned cut in the 45p rate was to cost the Exchequer £2 billion. But by far a bigger cut was the reversal to the national insurance rise. That's worth £18 billion, and that is already being legislated for. And then the largest cut was the abandonment of the rise in corporation tax on company profits, worth nearly £19 billion a year. There could be some pressure for policy reverses here, as well as to extend the existing windfall tax on rising energy prices. This U-turn is small in value terms, but hugely symbolic. The markets reacted well initially, with sterling going up a bit and the government's borrowing costs going down a bit. On the one hand, this reflects the government coming into line with the market consensus that there's a need for a plan with a solid set of numbers. On the other, the markets now don't know if there are other things in the plan that eventually will require a U-turn that's not being admitted to right now. And for the Chancellor, in the two fundamental aspects of doing his job, which is getting market credibility and being able to pass a budget, he's still playing catch up, and he thinks growth is the answer. In the meantime, a mini budget premium on borrowing costs remains, and pressures on tax and spending too are being noticed in the nearby Northfields constituency, which switched to the Conservatives in 2019.
I'd be really worried if I'd got a mortgage.
Well, we're worried for our children because they're going to struggle.
Yeah.
They're struggling with their mortgages.
Universal credit is just not enough. People who earn more should pay more tax. Simple as, isn't it? That's my mathematics anyway.
If there aren't further tax U-turns, the pressure will be for cuts to public spending. If the government doesn't increase spending in line with rising inflation, that could mean effectively an £18 billion cut in real terms to many already struggling services. Perhaps tax credits and benefits won't be increased in line with inflation, but instead the rise in wages. That's worth £5.5 billion per year, but difficult during a cost of living crisis. Or long-term investment could be reduced, but that underpins the promise to level up. The new Chancellor has decided to stop digging the hole created at the mini-budget, but how to fill the one created in the public finances remains unclear. Faisal Islam, BBC News in Birmingham.
Let's go back live to Birmingham and Chris Mason, our political editor. What's your view this evening, Chris, of the standing of the government?
Well, what they're trying to do, Huw, is wrestle back a sense of confidence and a sense that they are in control. That's why we're hearing tonight they're going to bring forward this announcement on how they're going to deal with government debt, which is one of the contributory factors to the spooking of the markets in the last couple of days. That's why we had that screeching U-turn in the early hours of this morning, and then at breakfast time when Kwasi Kwarteng was stood here acknowledging why he was swallowing a policy he was very proud of just a couple of days before. Politically, though, a day like this is dangerous. It's excruciating for the politicians involved, but it's dangerous. Why? Because it creates a precedent that a government that was saying just a couple of weeks ago that it was willing to be unpopular, that it would embrace the difficult, well, only embraces the difficult until it becomes too difficult. And so critics within the Conservative Party and beyond will now look at that colossal list of challenges that the government faces in the coming months, whether it be the benefits bill or broader public sector spending, and wonder, will they have the stomach for that when the bills are huge, the decisions are difficult, and the political pressure is absolutely massive. Now, those in government hope one excruciating day is worth it versus several days, weeks or months of being asked the same question about the same rate of tax. The thing is, they'll have shifted the conversation on from one issue, that top rate of tax, and opened up a conversation that was coming anyway on all of those other themes. The new Prime Minister knows things are going to be bumpy.
Chris, many thanks again. Chris Mason with the latest thoughts tonight at the Conservative Conference in Birmingham. You can find more updates, more news and analysis from Chris and colleagues on BBC News Online, bbc.co.uk/news. And of course, you've also got the BBC News app that you can access as well. So let's turn to the conflict in Ukraine, where President Zelensky says that his troops have made more advances against Russian forces. Now, this comes just days, of course, after Ukraine retook the strategic town of Liman, a move seen as a significant setback for the Russian campaign in the east of the country. And now we have the Ukrainian drive in the south also making progress. And President Zelensky said that 2 villages near the strategic city of Kherson have been recaptured. Despite that, well, Russia's lower house of parliament has unanimously ratified a bill today annexing all of these 4 regions of Ukraine. They've gone ahead with it. So what is life like for the millions of people now living in the territory occupied by Russia? Our correspondent Paul Adams reports now from southern Ukraine.
Ukrainian forces on the move again, this time taking back villages in the south. Progress has been slow here since the summer, but this all seemed to happen quickly, again taking Russia by surprise. For Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, it was more good news to report in his nightly address. He thanked the units involved. And far to the east, scene of September's lightning counteroffensive, Ukrainian troops are still pushing forward, collecting abandoned Russian equipment as they go.
Now this machine will work for our armed forces.
Russia now has major headaches on 2 fronts at the same time, just when it's trying to conscript, train and equip badly needed extra troops. Vladimir Putin may have celebrated annexing chunks of Ukraine, but his problems just keep multiplying. Is that you? It's Paul. But for civilians trapped inside Russian-controlled territory, life is getting harder. We reach a man in Kherson who doesn't want to be identified. He says the big fear is conscription.
Well, the conscription is just a matter of time. We don't know which time. People around Kherson are being conscripted by dozens, and it makes us all afraid, of course.
Russia's annexation is also making it much harder for people to leave. Here at the reception centre in Zaporizhia, officials are used to seeing 1,000 people a day fleeing occupied areas. Today, it's practically deserted. 19-year-old Maxim finally made it after 4 days of travelling and waiting. He's here with his brother, mother and the family cat.
We stayed there because we didn't know where to go. But after the referendum, it got very scary, because I could get conscripted into the Russian army, and I could never fight for Russia.
Maxim's family is moving on, hoping to find safety and some kind of future far from Russian occupation. 30 people have made it out so far today. Hope and uncertainty mixing in equal measure. Paul Adams, BBC News, Zaporizhia.
The UK is facing a significant risk of gas shortages this winter. That's according to the industry's regulator, which could also have an effect on electricity supplies. Ofgem says that because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, there is a possibility that the UK could suffer a gas supply emergency, and this would lead to supplies being cut to power stations which use gas to generate electricity supplies. Our business correspondent Caroline Davis is here with me. What else do we know about this warning, Caroline?
Well, Huw, clearly this is a worry for not just groups like Ofgem and power stations as well, which is why they're talking about these contingency plans. But also we know that this is something that's being looked at by the National Grid. They've got their winter outlook, which is coming out later this week, and they're mapping different sorts of scenarios in that as well, which they normally wouldn't do. We also know that the government has been putting in plans since the summer for extreme situations, for example, blackouts or potential shortages as well. So then the next big question is, how likely is this to happen? Well, the government and Ofgem have said that the UK is in a good position, potentially even stronger than other countries, for example, Germany, which is more reliant on Russian gas. But there are certain things that are going to be out of the government's control. So, for example, if we have a very cold winter here, if there's very cold winter on the European mainland, potentially if there's bad weather that takes out some of the energy imports coming into the UK, Russia's actions, there's lots of uncertainty that is swirling around at the moment, which is why all of these scenarios are being prepared for.
Caroline, many thanks again. Caroline Davis there, our business correspondent. A man has appeared in court charged with the murder of Olivia Pratt-Corbell. The 9-year-old was killed in August when a gunman chased another person into her home in Liverpool. Thomas Cashman, who is 34, has also been charged with 2 counts of attempted murder. Our North of England correspondent Danny Savage has more details.
This is the man accused of murdering Olivia Pratt-Corbell. 34-year-old Thomas Cashman is the alleged gunman who police believe shot the schoolgirl in her own home. Earlier this morning on the waterfront in Liverpool city centre, he and another man were brought to court. They both appeared before a magistrate. As well as the murder of Olivia, Thomas Cashman from West Derby in Liverpool is accused of the attempted murder of Olivia's mother, Cheryl Corbell, and Joseph Nee, the man being chased at the time of the shooting. The second man, Paul Russell, is charged with assisting an offender. The 40-year-old is alleged to have driven Thomas Cashman to an address and disposed of his clothing. He was remanded in custody. Both spoke only to confirm their name and address. 9-year-old Olivia was killed after a commotion outside her house late at night on the 22nd of August. Her mother opened the front door as a gunman fired at another man he was chasing. Olivia was hit in the chest and died. This afternoon, Thomas Cashman appeared here again, this time in front of a Crown Court judge. After a short hearing, which lasted just 13 minutes, he was remanded in custody. Olivia's mother was among those in the public gallery listening to proceedings. She and Olivia's father stared intently at Thomas Cashman. He will go on trial in March next year. Danny Savage, BBC News, Liverpool.
In Indonesia, the chief of police in the city, where a stampede at a football stadium left 125 people dead, has now been sacked. A further 9 officers who were deployed at the match have been suspended. Tear gas was fired at fans, causing a crush at the exits, and there were 32 children among those who died. From Java, our correspondent Laura Bicker sent this report.
Fans once flocked here to show their love of football. Now the stadium has become a focal point of grief. There's also mounting anger towards a police force many feel played a role in this disaster. Aris Usmatul made it out of the stadium. She was shocked to see bodies scattered in the streets. Why did they fire tear gas into the stands? Because there was a lot of women and children and the gates were locked, she said. They couldn't get out. Small groups of fans ran onto the pitch after the final whistle on Saturday. Police fired tear gas. They said it was used to avoid anarchy. Those in the stands rushed to leave, but in the chaos, the result was a deadly crush. The key focus of the investigation will be on the police use of tear gas, which FIFA has banned. Analysts say it's banned for a reason, because tear gas is used to disperse crowds. But fans tell us that some of the gates were locked. So where were they going to disperse the crowds to? 19-year-old Mohammed Hafiz wasn't supposed to be at the match on Saturday. He got an extra ticket with his girlfriend. This neighbourhood now mourn both young lives. And Mohammed's father has lost his only child.
I was shown my son's dead body. I stood back. I didn't want to see him. It's too much. My hope for football in Indonesia. Enough. This is the last. No more football in Indonesia.
Football violence has long been a problem in this country. Matches are suspended while the investigation continues. It could be that this huge loss of life may finally bring some changes. Laura Bicker, BBC News, Malang.
Back home, and the water regulator for England and Wales has told 11 suppliers to return £150 million to customers after the firms failed to meet their targets. Ofwat said that the companies had not met standards related to pollution, sewers and water supply. The money will be taken off household bills from April. The Supreme Leader of Iran has blamed the United States and Israel of orchestrating protests in Tehran and other cities following the death of a young woman who'd been detained by the morality police. In his first comments, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has claimed that he'd been heartbroken by Mahsa Amini's death. There were more protests today, with social media playing a key role, as our analyst editor Roz Atkins reports now.
This is last night in Tehran at one of Iran's most prestigious universities. Students in an anti-government protest were trapped in a car park by security officials. Others, outside, came under fire from what appeared to be paintballs. As you'd imagine, this is the lead story here on BBC Persian, and for my colleagues in this newsroom to establish what's happening in Iran, social media is crucial. All day, we've heard about more protests, such as here at Semnan University, east of Tehran. These students are chanting freedom, freedom. And by looking at videos such as this, the BBC's confirmed at least 65 protests in recent weeks, many led by women. This is from Shiraz Today. These girls are chanting death to the dictator, which is aimed at Iran's supreme leader. And as they know, by removing their headscarves, they're breaking Iranian law. And all the videos we use in our reporting are verified by journalists such as Barman Abbasi.
So what we do, we try to find some landmarks in the video that we can also find on Google Maps and also cross-reference them with videos of the same location we've had previously.
And the authorities don't want these videos to be seen. The internet's been heavily restricted. But the protests keep coming. They began with the death of Mahsa Amini after she was arrested by Iran's morality police. They've become a direct challenge to those in power. And now, for the first time, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has responded.
The death of the young woman broke our hearts. But what is not normal is that some people have made the streets dangerous, burned the Quran, removed hijabs from women, and set fire to mosques and cars.
It may have broken his heart, but there's no sign the supreme leader is listening to these schoolgirls singing a protest song but too scared to show their faces, or to the many others who demand the freedom to speak and dress as they choose. Ros Atkins, BBC News.
King Charles and the Queen Consort have attended their first joint public engagement since the end of the period of royal mourning following the death of Her Majesty the Queen. The couple visited Dunfermline in Fife today, where the King marked its new status as Scotland's 8th city. Our royal correspondent Daniela Relf was there.
Dunfermline welcomed a new monarch, and they looked pleased to see him. It was Malcolm III who first created this royal seat of power almost 1,000 years ago. Today, it was Charles III who met the crowds and granted Dunfermline city status, awarded to mark his mother's Platinum Jubilee.
It is my hope that this new distinction will not merely burnish the legacy of our past, but will also brighten the prospect of our future. That would, I know, gladden my dear mother's heart, as it certainly gladdens mine.
Marking the 950th anniversary of Dunfermline Abbey is relatively safe territory. But in these early days of the King's reign, there has already been a noticeable shift. In line with government guidance, he will not be attending the COP climate conference in Egypt next month. The freedoms of being Prince of Wales replaced by the constraints of being king. In Edinburgh, the focus moved to the Palace of Holyrood House and a reception to celebrate the British South Asian community. The event here fits firmly into the King's thinking as he begins his reign. He has already pledged to use his time as monarch to protect the diversity of the UK. In Holyrood's Great Gallery, there was a clamour to get up close to the King and Queen Consort. Some were even able to sneak in the odd selfie. Amongst the guests, representatives of the NHS, the Armed Forces and the arts, including the music producer Naughty Boy, who started his career with a grant from the Prince's Trust. Now here to meet the King as an ambassador for his community.
I'm a Muslim, Pakistani, British born, you know, and that gives me so much hope for the future. And like British Asian Trust as well, like everything they're doing in like Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, you know, issues that are sometimes like marginalised in news, but our king like cares about them.
Balancing those issues he cares about with his responsibilities as head of state, the challenge the King now faces as his schedule of official engagements begins. Daniela Relf, BBC News, Edinburgh.
Well, the time is just about 10:30. It's time for the weather, and Matt is with me tonight. Hi, Matt.
Hi there, Huw. Well, just first of all, according to data from the Met Office today, September across England and Wales, the first time since February, saw a month with above average rainfall. But as this shot from this afternoon near Sheffield and Barnsley, the reservoirs still desperately low. We need more months like that, and we're certainly going to see rain this week, but probably not in the areas where we really need it the most. This is a rainfall chart showing how much rain will fall through the rest of the week. Notice still very little to the south and east, the bulk of which, the brighter colours here, are where the heaviest of the rain will be. We could see up to around 200 millimetres with a risk of flooding in parts of the Highlands. Why? Well, it's the jet stream governing things, throwing in these areas of cloud all the way from the Atlantic, meeting those hills in the west, as it will do tonight. Rain becoming heavy and persistent once again in western Scotland, also Northern Ireland to take us into tomorrow morning's commute. Pretty mild here, though, with a strengthening breeze, 14-15 degrees the low, a little bit fresher to the south and east, but here a dry and bright start for much of England and Wales. And in fact, East Anglia, South East England, Channel Islands should stay dry and bright throughout the day. That early rain in western Scotland, Northern Ireland should ease. Bright conditions to the north. Could stay cloudy though, southern Scotland, Northern Ireland throughout, and turning wetter Northern England and Wales, particularly on the hills in the west as we go through tomorrow. Blustery day across the board, but it's that wind coming in from the southwest means it should be a fairly mild one. Now, as we go into tomorrow evening and overnight, the rain returns its way northwards again, and then more in the way of persistent rain. With this developing system, it looks like it's going to develop more once it gets to the east of us, where the strongest of the winds will be, but it's still going to be a day of gales for some as we go through Wednesday. Cloud, persistent rain for most of us during the morning, quickly sweeping its way eastwards, clearing East Anglia and the southeast last of all into the afternoon. Sunshine and showers then developing in its wake, but as I said, a windy day. Could see winds gusting up to 50-60 miles an hour in the west potentially, and it will turn fresher later in the day and a fresh and showery end to the week. Huw.
OK, Matt, thanks very much once again. Matt there with the latest on the weather. That's BBC News at 10 on Monday, the 3rd of October. More analysis of the day's main stories, of course, and lots of talk of the U-turn at the Conservative Party conference. Victoria, Derbyshire, presenting Newsnight just in a few minutes on BBC Two. And on BBC One, well, you know that all of our colleagues in the nations and regions are standing by right now with the news where you are. But from all of us here on the 10 o'clock team, thanks for watching and good night.